Somebody was talking about like was at a meeting of a board that had to go into executive session. They said in some like places the practice like it's very formal, so it's like we stand to indicate that we've risen from executive session, and then we sit back down to resume the regular meeting or whatever. And it's like, my goodness.
Clarity.
Yeah, exactly.
That sounds like a practice we can dispense with.
Yes, I think so.
All right, we're going to have a little bit of fun.
Marilyn and Roy, welcome. We have internet, and we are glad to have you join us.
Thank you.
Thank you for us.
I think Roy can hear us. Marilyn, you can hear us?
Yes.
Wonderful.
The
mouse is yours. Is that kind of like the helm is yours? The mouse is yours, John.
See you later.
That makes him the captain.
Everybody go ahead. You know how I get a whole day from me. Executive steps.
Thank you.
I have two chairs. So let's get started. I literally ran up here for service. I mean, they can give me more time in between for makeup or something. So let's start with prayer. Gracious God, we gather again to imagine the future. Imagine what you might do, what great thing you might do in the future to bring the people of Israel into your Christian body. We can't know how that would happen. We dream and pray for it to happen someday as we study Paul's idea of how it will happen. Be with us, guide us, keep our mind always on you and our eyes on Jesus. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right. Ortolan bunting. Ortolan bunting. It's a bird.
Yeah.
Has anyone here ever heard of the ortolan?
No.
Anyone? The ortolan.
I can play it though.
Ortolan bunting. All right. Watching the TV program this last week. It's a bird that lives in Western Europe, and it commutes. It migrates from Western Europe to Africa in the winter, and it goes back to Western Europe. I'm watching this TV show, and there's a chef, two guys eating a specialized private dinner, and they're eating ortolan. And Kathy has told me about it because she's one of those foodies. She knows all this stuff. And I'm sitting there going, this is amazing. They're eating ortolan. Now, this is not a Food Network show, so I'm not going to tell you how to prepare ortolan because it is evil. I'm not going to go any further. But the ortolan is fried. It's a small songbird, very small, and you eat it whole, except with the beak. You put the legs in first, you lie down, and pull the beak out. Okay, but that's not the fun part. Here's the fun part. It's French, of course. Yeah. You wear a napkin over your head when you're eating ortolan. A napkin, white napkin, or a towel, or something over your head. Has anybody heard of this? Nobody. You Americans, you're just so backwards. What is it? Parochial, actually, probably more pilgrim. You wear a napkin over your head. And there's two reasons why. There's the French la 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 reason, which is to allow the aromas of the ortolan to come up in your nose, kind of like they have you smell the wine before you drink it, because it's the aromas of the wine that you get all the complexities of. That's not the reason at all. You don't want to know what the reason is, so you can hide from God. Literally. doesn't mean yes, absolutely. You're absolutely right. It shields from that napkin, shields from God's eyes the shame of such a decadent and disgraceful act. That's why you have a napkin on it. So I'm watching this TV show. They're eating, well, they're getting ready to order a lot. One guy knows what they're about to do, the chef. The two guys, what's got stuff on their head. And they said, why do we wear this? They say, so God can't see what you're doing. And the atheist says, if there is a God, which I don't think there is, I'm not sure this would fool him. I think that is such a perfect lesson for us today. And I'm thinking about this handkerchief on my head. I go, what did Adam and Eve do after they ate the apple? Do you remember what they did in Genesis? They hid. They hid. They hid it from God. Yeah, right. Like God didn't know, A, what they had done, 2, where they were, and 3, that like God didn't know they were going to do it before they did it. Isn't that like us? When we're talking about ortolan. You know what ortolan is? You eat ortolan, it's a French delicacy. In fact, it is so outrageous, it's so despicable. The French outlawed it in 1999. And the European Union outlawed it in 2007. It's because they were killing all the ortolans. I mean, the birds were dying off. But anyways, isn't it just like us to, rather than not do it, we do it and think we can hide it from God? That's it. Sunday school's over. I preached my sermon. In fact, you can't hide from God. Underline it. And if you think you can't hide, you look like an idiot. Just do. When you eat ortolan, Terry, you put a handkerchief on over your head so God can't see what you're doing. God can't see what you're doing. Yeah, he doesn't God know everything anyways? Doesn't God read the heart? And it's just, it is so juvenile. I've got a 4-year-old grandson that I think is smarter than that. The God's up there, I'm down here, and I can put a handkerchief on my head and God can't see me. What if God came down and just looked? What if God, the Holy Spirit is in you and looked out? I mean, they know, God knows what's going on. I think that's a great example of human ignorance about us and God, and about our lack of self-control, and we're just going to hide it. We're just going to hide it from God.
So, you know, the stadium that the Cowboys play in, it has an opening at the top. So God can see his favorite team.
Yeah. Sure. Now, I've been told. Yeah. You know, Notre Dame had that building at the end of the football stadium, and Jesus is down there like this. He's actually welcoming the crowds.
Oh, really?
And they call it touchdown Jesus. He kind of looks like he's holding it's at the end of the football season. And I don't think Jesus is marking it. Anyways, I had to tell you this ortolan story. It's a weird story. If you want to get grossed out, you can look up what they do. But I'm not going to tell you. Oh, I said, I've got to tell my class. All right. We're in chapter 11 this week. What has happened in chapter 9? Why don't you review for me what has happened rather than me review for you? Oh, the affirmation of faith this morning that Matthew wrote, and we did in the first service, starts out with first line: eternal God, our judge and redeemer, we confess that we have tried to hide from you, for we have done wrong. And I went, that's the order. That's the order. did the accusation of faith.
And
And they didn't even know. They didn't even know. Tell me, what's happened in 9 and 10? Chapters 9 and 10. 9, 10, and 11 are sister chapters. They all go together to form a whole.
well, it's him trying to deal with the question of Jews.
Yes. Yes. And how is he doing? Claire? Because this is the future. This is his prediction of tomorrow.
Well, it amazes me that his rationale would say salvation is for everybody.
Yeah, okay. He came up with, yes, that was his conclusion. Salvation is for everyone, even the Gentiles. Yes. Even the Gentiles. What else has happened?
He's worried about the Jews.
Oh,
They're staying behind. Because they're probably what they should be, the chosen people.
They're the chosen people, and they're
Not going along.
and they missed the Messiah that was prophesied that would come. Yes. What else is going on in Paul's mind? Anything else? You got lots of notes there. Did I say anything?
And so it's down, the Jews and all of their 632 or however.
Rules, yes.
They thought that's what they needed.
Yes. Yes.
And Paul says, look, it's not it. It's about faith,
Right.
not the rules. And
Not the rules.
and furthermore, the Jews failed to go out and spread the news.
Yes.
Here's the question I put out last week.
Paul's dilemma.
What's wrong? I thought Deb was Deb from the North Carolina.
Why are so many of the Jews refusing to believe in the Messiah? This is Paul. This is his. Oh, he is. If you read 9, 1 through 3 again, he said, I would die if it would mean salvation would come to the Jews. God, kill me. That's how sorrowful, sad he was. It's his people. His ethnic people were not, weren't believing in the Messiah.
I think the stumbling block for the Jews, but I'm not sure, that it's Romans exactly. Was that Jesus didn't fit what they thought the Messiah would be.
There's no doubt that's exactly what Romans says. Nature kills a lot of people. Yes. Yes. So we have nature out there. In Libya, the floods, the earthquakes, the volcanoes. And practically every week we can talk about the floods, the earthquakes, and the volcanoes. All right, I'm going to add to this question the logical trap. We've got God in a box. Here's the logical trap. 1. God is obliged to keep God's promise. God really wasn't thinking when he promised Abraham what he promised Abraham. And number 2, I'm getting messy.
Hard to write that. Whoa.
It is hard to write it. God's duty to bring justice to the world. It's judgment and justice, including the Jews, who were also sinners. We think we have God in a trap. How can God fulfill his promises that he made to Abraham when he studied them? He's obliged to keep God's promises. And how does he bring justice to an evil people, an evil world, who has disobeyed him, won't listen to him? How does God do that? And we sit here in our human minds and say, God can't do it. God can't do it. Chapter 11 is how God's going to do it. Chapter 11 is God's answer through Paul as to how God's going to do it. And there's been some hints about it up to now. The other question that's raised here is, has the plan changed? Are the Gentiles now the new chosen people and the Jews are out? I mean, the Jews thought they were the chosen people and the Gentiles were out. Has it flipped? So chapter 11 is both an answer to this trap, how God gets out of this trap, which answers this question. Well, it resolves this question. And two, a warning to the Gentile Christians. Paul spends 20 verses in this chapter warning us, don't be like the Jews. He really does. Don't be arrogant like they are. Don't look down upon them. Of course, we've done a terrible job. We've made fun of the Jews for 2,000 years, so the other question is, with the apparent total failure of Israel to believe the gospel, very few Jews became Christians. You know some of them. There weren't a lot of them. Does it appear that God has changed the plan and created a new chosen people formed from the Gentiles rather than the Jews? All right. Romans 11, 1 through 6. I think it's time to get started. Romans 11, 1 through 6. I have faith. Has God rejected his people? By no means. I myself am an Israel, descendant of Abraham, a member of the tribe of Benjamin. Benjamin and Judah stayed in the southern kingdom. Benjamin and Judah are the two tribes that didn't go away. The other 10 tribes disappeared. Benjamin and Judah were there the whole time. In southern Judah, the southern kingdom, where Jerusalem is. So he's saying, I am from the people that remain in the promised land. That one of the two tribes that remain in the promised land. God has not rejected his people who we foreknew. Then he told the story of Elijah. I blew the setup. I told you the story of Elijah last week. Do you remember? I told you Elijah. So Paul says, do you not know what the scripture says of Elijah? How he pleads with God against Israel. Lord, they have killed your prophets. They have demolished your altar. I alone am living, and they are seeking my life. This is after the fire storm on Mount Carmel, killing of all the prophets of Baal. But what is the divine reply to him? God says, I have kept for myself 7,000 who have not bowed the knee to me. So too at the present time there is a remnant, chosen by grace. But if it is by grace, it is no longer on the basis of works. Otherwise, grace would no longer be grace. 1 through 6. Why does Paul bring that up? What does that have to do with the remnant? The remnant is also referred to in the Old Testament that when the southern kingdom was taken over to Babylon in exile, they were in exile for 70 years. And then they were released when the Persian general defeated them. The Persian general defeated Babylon. Anyways, no, not Darius. Darius. And he said, the victorious general said, Jewish people, you can go home. You know how many people went home? We don't really know. Very small. You know how many people stayed in Babylon? A huge number. Why? Why would they not go home after 70 years? Why would you not go?
Everything that accumulated in Babylon?
Yes, exactly. We have a home here. I have a house here. I have a garden here. I have friends here. I have a job here. Oh, yes, many, almost all of them. I was born here. This is my native land. I'm not going back. And so the story is a remnant went back to Jerusalem. And then we continue the story there. And so this remnant idea goes through God's word in the Hebrew Testament. Why is Paul here? What's it have to do right now? In Paul's mind.
Only a remnant followed him in believing in Jesus.
Absolutely. You guys are the fastest. A remnant of Jews followed Jesus, the Messiah, and believed. One of them was Paul. Another one was Peter. The disciples, others, they are the remnant. And he's saying, as the remnant, this is the way God, I don't know. I don't know what metaphor to use, but it's kind of like putting yeast in bread. It's the way God gets God's way. The remnant leads to others following. And he's saying exactly that he is the remnant.
Well, and that's why it's so good that Jesus had all this way.
Yes, because they made bread, yes.
Yeah.
And so he's arguing that God is using the same plan that God has always. In fact, if you want to talk about the Exodus, you think everyone left Egypt with the Jewish people in the Exodus? No. There was a community that stayed behind. How do we know that? I think we know it because Joseph and Mary took Jesus back to Egypt and lived with the Jewish people for 3 years until Herod died. There were Jewish people back there in Egypt that stayed. Not all of them left. We don't all agree on anything. If I said let's all move to Santa Fe, you wouldn't follow. I just know that you wouldn't because you're this. And Presbyterians are not. They're just sheep. That's what they are. They just wander over anywhere they want to. And the other point of Paul is that Paul is a remnant. He was called by grace, not by grace. He's not following the law that God would say. It was God choosing him that God would say. Despite universal sin, Jews and Gentiles both being disobedient, being sinful, God has found a way through unmerited grace alone to do once more, not only on a grander scale, what he did at the time of Elijah. The unbelief of the Jews is serious. It is a serious problem. This question is a serious question. But God's plans, God's power, and God's grace are more than equal to the problem. Elijah thought he was the last believer. And they were out to the queen was out to kill him. And he said, they kill me, it's all gone. And God said, oh no, I got some. I got some others. 7,000 others. And he sent Elijah out to find them. And Elijah did. They were there. They were there. All right. How about other? Do you see anything else at 1 through 6 that you think we need to comment on? This week is kind of a packed chapter, so we need to keep moving. Did anybody else want to comment on verses 1 through 6? Anything you saw there?
I just love that if it is by grace, it is no longer on the basis of works. Otherwise, grace would be no longer grace.
No, it would be worse. If it's then it's not about grace. The two are mutually exclusive. Yeah, thank you. As Paul, at least as he wrote in the Greek and as we translate it into English, Paul He was a poet. He spoke in powerful phrases and knew how to put a phrase together that stuck in your mind. Stuck in your mind. All right, the next section is Romans 11, 7 through 15. Are we ready to move on? We need to talk. Yes, and that's what we're going to start talking about. The drafting of Jews back into the Christian faith is part of chapter 11. Exactly this. All right, who would like to read verses 7 through 15? 11, 7 through 15. This is longer, so I'm not going to read it. I'll let you. Thank you, Janie. You always volunteer. I appreciate the volunteers. 7.
What then?
Yes.
Israel failed to obtain what it was seeking. The elect obtained it, but the rest were hardened, as it is written. God gave them a sluggish spirit, eyes that could not see and ears that could not hear, down to this very moment. And David says, let their table become a snare and a trap, stumbling block and retribution for them. Let their eyes darken so that they cannot see, and keep their bags forever bent. So I ask, have they stumbled so as to fall? By no means. But through their stumbling, salvation has come to the Gentiles, so as to make Israel jealous. Now, if their stumbling means riches for the world, and if their defeat means riches for Gentiles, how much more will their full inclusion be? Now I'm speaking to you, Gentiles. Inasmuch then as I am an apostle to the Gentiles, I glorify my ministry in order to make my own people jealous, and thus save some of them. For if their rejection is the reconciliation of the world, what will their acceptance be but life from the dead?
All right. Paul is quoting from Deuteronomy and from one of the Psalms. That's the part of verses looking 8 through 10 that are in quotation marks. He's quoting from his Hebrew Testament that he has, that is talking about two things the Jews have done. Paul puts together jealousy and stumbling and puts them together as this is what has happened to the Jewish people. So, how do we get there? Paul was sitting there saying, what is God up to? What is the purpose of Jews not following the Messiah? And why has God done this? And his answer is what? It's in there.
So that salvation spread more what?
Into the Gentiles. Yes, yes. Paul talks about the Jews not following the Messiah, and that stumbling, that weight, that failure to acknowledge Jesus Christ, the Israel Messiah, opened the door to people like Paul to preach the gospel to the Gentiles. And the Gentiles came in, relatively speaking, in droves. Gentiles were given the message of salvation, the good news of the gospel, and they didn't even know that there was a war going on. And God said, come to me. And they did. They listened to the gospel when the Jews could not. God has always wanted Gentiles and Jews to be on equal standing regarding God's universal sovereignty and rich mercy. God intends that the whole world be saved. That's God's pleasure. That's God's desire. But the way it's going to happen is the Jews are not going to see it. And then they're going to come in later. Why are they going to come in later? Paul says jealousy. Now, what are they jealous about? What are they jealous about? What did the Jews have that the Gentiles received? What did the Jews think they were getting that the Gentiles got instead? It's God's grace. They didn't get the Christmas gift. that they were expecting, or the Hanukkah. You know, they thought they were going to get the Messiah and be saved. And the Gentiles got it instead of them. Now, jealousy. Jealousy is all part of the Old Testament. It is a powerful emotion. Most of the examples we have are younger brother, older brother. All right? Cain and Abel. The older brother killed the younger brother, right? It's jealous of him because God liked Abel's, didn't like Cain's. All right, Cain and Abel. Ishmael and Isaac. Ishmael was the son of Abraham by the slave woman, Hagar. Isaac was the son of Abraham by his wife, Sarah. Ishmael was actually older than Isaac. Younger brother gets chosen, older brother gets passed over, and as tradition tells it, becomes head of the Muslims, the Arabs. Yeah. Once again, jealousy. Ishmael and Hagar were cut off because Abraham had a true son through Sarah. Jealousy. Esau and Jacob. Who was born first? They were twins. Esau was born first. And Jacob came out second, holding on to Esau's foot. Great image. And Jacob got the blessing. Actually stole this. But we won't go into it. It's part of the napkin thing. Jacob stole the blessing, and he was blessed, and it was through his line that Israel was formed, and not through Esau. And they kind of had a truce at one point. I mean, Jacob ran off because he afraid of his brother. And he might have. Comes back. There's kind of an easy truce, but these jealousy things in the Old Testament are not resolved. They're just there. God chose Isaac. Is anything resolved? No. It's just the line that God chose. God chose Jacob. Was Esau any less angry? No, he's still angry. Joseph's 10 older brothers were jealous of Joseph because Jacob loved Joseph the best. So they were going to kill him and didn't. Sold him into slavery. That is the only one of these Genesis stories of jealousy that we have a resolution. And what's the resolution? What does Joseph tell his brothers at the very end of Genesis?
That God had intended so you could save them.
You meant it for evil, God used it for good. And there was kind of a resolution of that animosity, and the family of Jacob all came down, and they were saved through the famine due to the planning of Joseph. Jesus' story of the prodigal son. There's an older brother and a younger brother. The younger brother demands his portion of the estate, runs off and squanders it, comes back. The father puts on a lavish feast, and where is the older brother? Out in the field moping. Literally won't come in. Literally will not join the celebration. Paul is saying Israel is the older brother. Gentiles are the younger brother. God has picked them to receive salvation and made Israel jealous. What do you think? Older brother, younger brother. They have a shot. But he doesn't.
It's just like this whole thing. It's not just for the Jews.
No,
for all of us. For all. He gave us sluggish spirit, eyes that would not see.
Oh, well, yes. There is no doubt. See, yeah, you're absolutely right. We're both awful. All right, we're both evil. Neither one of us.
We both have to stay down where our money is.
We don't return to the promised land. We have napkins on our heads. We're acting like idiots. That's right. And even his only begotten son, we took him, stripped him, mocked him, whipped him, and killed him. Thank you, God. You have any more gifts?
So why is tradition, the firstborn become kings and queens?
Culture, society, human,
I
not
mean,
God.
it's going on for a long time.
It's been going on for a long, and it's universal.
It was already a tradition even before the Israelites.
Right. Yeah.
I think that's human invention,
Yeah.
that the oldest son gets everything.
My husband was
And the
so
oldest
proud
son and
of
the
me.
daughters get nothing. And God doesn't follow those rules. You see, the problem with God is God believes every person is created equal, but we're all evil. That he believes in the American Constitution, all people are created equal, but we're all evil and we also die. That's not a very good thing. That's not a very good thing. So Israel now, as a whole, and we say as a whole because some Jews did become Christians. We're not saying no. Israel as a whole is now in the position of the older brother. Gentile Christians joining a small group of Jews who believe in the gospel are the younger brother. So jealousy and sibling rivalries, and they're not always explained or resolved. Jealousy and stumbling, losing your footing. Jealousy that the privileges of being the chosen people were intercepted by the Gentiles and being enjoyed by them. Paul is convinced that the Jews are the chosen people. There's no doubt about it. And they were chosen for a specific purpose and to have privilege and to be blessed by God. Paul has no doubt that God knew the Jews would disobey, rebel, and corrupt it in some way. And they would think they were entitled by the birthright. We are sons of Abraham. You've heard those people say that. We are sons of Abraham. We are privileged. We're better than everybody else. And God would say, no, you're equal to everyone else. You're equally bad. The stumbling was used, even intended by God, in order to bring Gentiles flooding into the people of God, the family of Abraham. If you can, this is N.T. Wright's opinion. If you can look at this story hard enough, you can see that it reflects the way Jesus of Nazareth was treated. It's the same story. They were brought low. Jews were brought low so that the world may be lifted up. They were cast away for the reconciliation of the world, and they were brought back to life so that all men. That's the story of Jesus. Jesus was brought low so that the world could be lifted up with his death. Jesus was cast away so that we would be reconciled with God. And Jesus was resurrected, brought back to life so that all may live. The Jews are going through the same story, just at a different level, different quality, different. What do you think?
You're saying the culture is reflecting the individual.
No? Well, I don't know where you're. No, I'm just saying, you up. It's a repeat of Jesus, but of course it's happening to a nation instead of a person. You know, happening to a nation instead of a person. Paul sees what has happened to Israel as a pattern of Jesus the Messiah. And he sees in Jesus' glorious resurrection the possibility that the Jews may be welcomed back. Now, I've got to ask, how long does it take jealousy to act? Because it's been 2,000 years. Is Paul right or is he wrong? He wrote this 2,000 years ago. Said the Jews will be led back to the gospel through jealousy. It hasn't happened. Is that still the way it's going to be? Verses 13 through 32 of chapter 11 are warnings for the Gentile Christians. And I've already told you what warning is. Don't be arrogant. Don't think that you are now the chosen people. You're no better than the Jews. God just blessed you. That's it. Verses 16 to 24 of chapter 11 are about 2 olive trees. Actually, let's do verse 16 first. Just read that. We stopped at that. James reading. If the part of the dough offered as first fruits is holy, then the whole batch is holy. And if the root is holy, then the branches are also holy. That idea of first fruits is that the Israel people gave the first fruits of their harvest to the glory of God in the sacrifice, through the sacrificial system. The first fruits that were offered to God through the sacrificial system made the whole harvest holy that is dedicated to God. The early Jewish Christians were the first fruits. And that means in principle that the whole Jewish people have been presented to God and now made holy. That's one line, verse 16. Paul's making that argument. That all the disciples, the other preachers that Paul worked with, all of those early Jewish Christians made all of the Jewish people holy. They were the first fruits. They were the sacrifice that made the whole people holy. That's verse 16. What do you think? This guy knew the Old Testament. I mean, there's not much doubt. He read it. Probably that memory.
I guess it would mean more people were used to the sacrificial system.
It would be, and that's the Jewish people. Yeah. So he's speaking to the Jewish people. He's speaking to the Jewish people. All right. Then we get into the altars. All right.
Wait a minute.
Go. I'm sorry. I'm not going. I stopped. Yeah.
Okay. But you say he's speaking to the Jewish people, but in 13 it says now he's speaking to the Gentiles.
Well, yes.
So he's speaking to both of them?
Yes. That's the church in Rome is made up of them.
Okay, okay.
And what happened in Rome, if you know your Roman history, the Jews were thrown out by Nero. They had to leave. Then they came back. The Gentile church had been established. The Jews come back. And I think there was some overlap. Oh, something. Yeah, this is our church. What are you doing here? And I think Paul had heard about it and was trying to deal with it. So I think he's talking to both. For you who are Jews, look at the first fruits. For you who are Gentiles, you're not better than the Jews.
But would the Gentiles know that he's talking about offerings in that?
When he says first fruits.
Oh.
When he says that's a code word. What's a code word for this? I'm sorry. Code word. We have code words too. But that would be a concept Gentiles would understand. And if they didn't know what the Jews was,
Well, all of them sacrificial things to their gods.
well, Rome did. The mythological gods, certainly they were sacrificed to them. All right, we have the olive trees. And have you been to the Mediterranean area? People travel to Greece and Spain, Italy, Spain. The olive tree is this super important product in the Mediterranean area. They're a major site, symbol of the Mediterranean world. And that is, we're not talking about Christians, we're talking about the whole Mediterranean world. If you go to Athens, you'll hear about the myth of the naming of the city of Athens. It's called something else in most places. And the people decided that we're going to rename the city of Athens after the god that helps us the most. And of course, this is a myth. These are the mythical gods, the Greek mythical gods. And Athena comes. And it's Athena against the god of Poseidon, which is the power of the seas. Athena versus Poseidon. And they're on the top of the Acropolis, where the Parthenon is now. They're on top of the hill. And Athena comes and says, "Here is my gift to Athens." Of course, it wasn't called Athens. here's my gift. And it was an olive tree. And tradition is there's one olive tree on the top of the Acropolis. It's the tree that Athena. That's the myth. It's the tree that Athena. And she gave the first olive tree in the world, which can live for centuries. And then the olive tree can provide oxygen, can provide shade, food, olive oil, wood for winter. The olive tree is incredibly helpful to that culture in that society. That was her gift. You know what Poseidon promised? He took the trident, hit the top of the Acropolis, created a sea. He says, I give you water. The problem was salt, was brackish. He gave him ocean water, and he couldn't drink it. And so they decided Athena was the winner. They picked the name of Athens to honor her. Poseidon got mad and said, Athens will never have to do water. They've had trouble with the water supply. So that is the olive tree. The olive tree has this magical spiritual status in the Mediterranean world. And what the farmers of that time would do is there's cultivated olives that grow olives, and there's wild olives. The wild olives don't actually grow. We have the same thing here. We have olive trees that don't grow olives. And Russian olives don't grow. And they would be considered wild. Then there's the cultivated olive trees. And so what you do is you take a branch of a cultivated olive tree that can produce fruit. You graft it into the wild olive, which can't produce fruit, but it has all this energy. It just grows anyway. And then you create fruit from a wild olive tree. Okay, Paul takes that example, which is true, but he flips it. He goes, in fact, his words are, he goes against nature. He flips it. He says the cultivated olive tree are the Jewish people. And some of their branches of the olive tree have been cut off. They didn't follow the Messiah. So they've been trimmed. They've been pruned. They aren't producing fruit. We're going to drop them on the ground. And wild olives are the Gentiles. And they have been grafted in to the cultivated olive plant so that they are now can rely on the root and the trunk of the Jewish people and their relationship with God. Wow. I mean, what a metaphor for what has happened. So he says to the Jewish people, he's talking about, he says to the Jewish people, actually, I'm probably more talking to the Gentiles, don't get all high and mighty about the fact that you're saved. Don't feel like you're something special. You're just grafted onto the Jewish olive tree. And if God can cut off those branches and they die, God can also take them and graft them back in. They were part of the tree to begin with. Don't think you're special just because you're now living. And some of the Jewish people have been cut off. What do you think? 16 to 24. I read 16. Let's do 17 to 24. But if some of the branches were broken, and you, Gentiles, a wild olive shoot, were grafted in their place to share the rich root of the olive tree, do not boast over the branches. If you do boast, remember it's not you that supports the root, but the root that supports you. You will say, you being Gentiles, branches were broken off so that I might be grafted in. That is true. They were broken off because of their unbelief. But you stand only in faith. So do not become proud, but stand in awe. For if God did not spare the natural branches, perhaps he will not spare you. Note then the kindness and the severity of God. Severity toward those who have fallen, but God's kindness towards you, provided you continue in this kindness. Otherwise, you also will become puffed. And even those of Israel, if they do not persist in unbelief, in other words, if they become believers, they will be grafted back in. For God has the power to graft them in. For if you've been cut from what is by nature a wild olive tree and grafted, contrary to nature, into a cultivated olive tree, how much more will these natural branches be grafted grafted back into their own tree. That's Paul's argument, a natural biological argument. How do you react to that? That's probably far. Yes, yes. So Gentiles don't get too confident. If God can cut off Jewish branches, he can cut off Gentile branches. If you forget where your source of power is. Paul is warning the Gentile Christians against the danger of arrogance. It's the very same problem that infected the nation of its arrogance. Paul reminds the Gentiles that they were saved by the extraordinary miracle of grace. They have no room and no right and no reason to boast over the original cultivated branches, which for the moment have been cut off. N.T. Wright wrote, there are no promises of salvation for those who think it is their birthright. In other words, your ancestors don't get you saved. Even if your ancestor is Abraham, that's not enough.
Nor do your good works.
Nor do your good works get you saved.
No matter how
get you saved. That's right, because we do two good works and then we expect the angel to protect us for 2,000 minutes.
You said this handkerchief thing. If you go to a Catholic church, the traditional Catholic church, they women wear I call doilies.
Oh, okay. Now, there's a little bit here in verse 22, which talks about the two aspects of God. As we look at God, we as humans tend to be one of two camps. Either we look at God as always being severe, always being judgmental, always mad, always ready to find fault, and always ready to let the guillotine drop and kill us. Those people who look at God as being severe and mean, and angry, and judgmental, need to be reminded that God can be kind, generous, and gracious as well, and a source of grace. There are other people who believe that God is simply kind and generous and could never, ever get mad at us, rebuke us, or warn anyone about anything. Paul says, no. People urgently need to discover just how much God hates evil in all of its destructive and dangerous ways, and how firmly God confronts and ultimately rejects those persons who persist in perpetuating godless amendments, both judgment and mercy. Judgment and justice. That's what I wrote up here before. We thought we had God on the trap. Paul says he's both. He's both. Maybe you are one of those two.
Thanks in a way. Sometimes it's more severe than that.
Yes, it could be just abundant in love, yes, or guidance, yes. We do tend to look at God as this mad grandfather, or this, and maybe Jesus more, kind of this lovable clown, kind of, just, oh, I love everyone, and everyone is good. And Paul had the same worries back then. Don't look at God on just one aspect. God is not monolithic in the sense of one way, total.
God never gives up.
God never gives up.
Never, ever, ever. Even when the image that everybody in here always talks about is when you're running and just chasing.
Yes.
I mean, he never is.
No, you stop running. He's coming.
Yeah.
There's a preacher who used to talk about God's being the heavenly light.
Really?
Everywhere. It won't stop. Relentlessly to chase you until fell on the catches up. And then he found.
Well, and never giving up, that's what he's waiting to do. That's why he doesn't.
Yeah, patience.
He lives the things.
Yes, that's right. And he's patient. He's, you know, if you were an eternal being, if you lived forever. Now, we now know the universe is what, 13.5 billion years?
13.8.
13.8 billion.
But now that's older than that now.
But anyways, that's one of the, anyways, okay. That's older than that. All right, older than 13.8 billion years. All right. If you're an eternal being, what is time, dude? Time is nothing. And so if I have to wait a while before the Jews come back to me, trying to just bring up some. All right, we're almost done with chapter 11. Any other comments? 25 to 32 finishes off this section. And I'm going to stop at 32. And next week, we're going to start at 33. 33 to 36, it's this great doxology about what's a doxology? It's a prayer, it's a praise song. It's a song of praise or glory or majesty. We'll pick that up next week. Start with it. Go into chapter 12. But 25 to 32. Paul was an apostle to the Gentiles. Paul has just been scolding the Gentiles about, don't think you're better than the Jews. And he comes back immediately and says, don't think I'm mad at you. Don't think I'm upset with you, Gentiles. I'm an apostle to the Gentiles. I want to spread the good news to you. I want you to hear it. I want you to know what God has in mind. I love you. And I want you to know that God intends mercy for all, Jews and Gentiles. Someday, and now we know, but it's more than 2,000 years away. Someday, it's not 13.8 billion. Paul starts this section with brothers. Now, in the Greek, the brothers word includes the women. So brothers is it's kind of like saying humanity. Brothers is inclusive of women. So it's an overall term. Paul is an apostle to the Gentiles. He's not favoring the Jews over the Gentiles, even though he's Jewish. Gentiles are not second-class Christians. Gentile Christians and Jewish Christians alike are in a full and complete sense Paul's true family and fellow members of the body of Christ. N.T. Wright brings this up. What if the Jewish people just loved Jesus the Messiah and just said, you're right? What if all the Jews just became Christians? Where would we be? Where would we be? Even if we're brought in, even if they got the point and said, love your neighbor, and they said, yeah, but he's not Jewish. Jesus would say, love your neighbor. Even if they got the point, we would feel like we were second-class citizens. We were brought in as natural. In this way, we're brought in first, and the Jewish people are grabbed back in second. Paul talks about the mystery. How is God saving God's whole people, Jew and Gentile alike? How is all Israel going to be saved? How did the hardening of the Jewish people help God's plan? He's answering those questions in these verses. So, it's 10:45. I think I'm going to give you a homework assignment. This is incredibly dense, complicated, and not, what's the term? Not automatic. This story. So the answer is, the assignment is, how would you do it? Yes. But I'm only going to give you a week. It is, people listen to this story, these chapters 9, 10, and 11, and go, this is too hard. This is too complicated. This is too twisted. But remember, God has to be faithful to God's promises, and God has to save the world. How would you do that? How would you do that? When God sent his own son, because God so loved the world. His own son said, come to me, and the world refused. Now what? How do you make it work when you have a disobedient world? Both you and Joseph. Nobody's listening to you. This is Paul's understanding of God's to do. What would your plan be? Say no more, except that's how you start. Thank you. We're just going to do the first 5 verses of chapter 12. They're the most beautiful 5 verses. Chapter 12 through 16 is the so what chapters. I mean, let's say all this is true. How are we as Christians supposed to live? What difference does it make? The first 5 verses of chapter 12. You'll know them. You've read them. Heard them. And it's the start of this wonderful section where Paul says, this is how you live as a Christian. That's what we start with. Thank you all. Have a good week. Be safe. Thank you. If not, just spell portable on your Google and you'll learn something. In fact, you don't